Hi, you're with Peter Carr and Scott Stewart on LTV's The Research Channel. Regular briefings we attend for all the big vendors often occur in Sydney, Melbourne, overseas. Scott, you recently flew down to Sydney for a couple of days. Microsoft had its Analyst Cloud Summit. So tell us the highlights.
Yeah, so it was a great event. It was cloud, and there was lots of cloud discussion and Microsoft's viewpoint. Interesting thing that that came out of it, you know, someone asked, well, what's Microsoft's definition of cloud? You know, what is their position on it? And
they're certainly doing enough advertising, you know, consumer-focused advertising for cloud. So this will be interesting. What was their definition?
Yeah, and I think that was the main reason for the question. Was, you know, we see the ad go to the cloud, and, you know, is cloud about family photos? You know, or what is Microsoft's view on it? And it was really an unanswered question. And a lot of the analysts were a little bit uncomfortable about that because Microsoft, I think their view is that they're seeing an increase in virtualization, they're seeing an increase in data centers being built, they're selling a lot more licenses, there's a lot more activity, and I think they're seeing it that this is a traditional way of doing things under a new name.
So it was really, the question was, what does cloud mean for Microsoft? And you know, no doubt there was probably a heavy product flavoured response in their answers. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on from the fact that, okay, cloud is an amorphous topic, and certainly if you're dealing with an organisation like Microsoft, there are a number of jump-in points for the cloud discussion, whether or not you're talking about as a service offering through a third party or a channel partner like a Telstra or a Data3 or someone else, or whether you're going direct through, you know, their cloud business productivity solutions, whether or not you're developing business process on an Azure platform capability, or whether or not, as you say, you're buying traditional Microsoft products via cloud-based delivery channels. So, you know, what was, I guess, you know, let's start with what was the structure of that first day?
Well, they made sure that whilst there was a lot of product focus, and that was good. So it was good to see that. I mean, they do that very well. They're very good with the way they develop their products and present them and package them, I guess, for their channel partners. There's also a very strong customer experience focus. So they had a number of case studies, a number of customers came in, and that was also very good to hear about, you know, their transition from, you know, their on-premise to their Azure cloud, etc. And or perhaps it was with their dynamic CRM. And so it was kind of good to really talk to the various CIOs who came in to present, and CEOs predominantly, and have them talk about you know, their positive experiences and their learnings, you know, from their cloud journey.
Okay, so what are, like, internally at Microsoft, what are the trends, what are the focus or strategies that they're really looking at to drive to do with cloud?
One of the standouts was that they have addressed, they claim to have addressed the licensing issue. And I know from my own experience as a CIO, you know, it was frustrating.
So let's just not jump too far ahead of ourselves. Let's maybe define what that licensing issue is for CIOs or organisations who use Microsoft.
So what they have addressed is the transition from on-premise to hosted. So they're saying that, you know, software assurance, for instance, the model, it was very difficult to affect a transition from one. If you had paid for software assurance in an on-premise scenario, you know, how could you transition it to a subscription-based model? And so they've done a lot of work engineering internally with their product, with their licensing, and being able to make that happen. So that was very positive.
So there's not actually a barrier to existing customers of on-premise Microsoft product wishing to move to a cloud. Is that the underlying premise there?
Basically, I think internally they had issues around if you were on an enterprise agreement and you wanted to move to a cloud, you know, how would you do it? And it was almost basically you could only do it when, you know, that was coming up for renewal.
Right.
So now that they're making this sort of portability.
So were they saying, or did they talk much about any midterm contract transitions for customers?
No, they kind of were basically saying that we have you know, mechanisms in place that will allow you to do the transfer. So in other words, we recognise if you had software assurance here, we recognise that you have software assurance in the hosted model. So they didn't go deep dive into the actual mechanics of it, but basically to say that we've solved the problem.
Yeah, sure.
So that was welcome news.
And I guess so from an end user perspective as well, if you think about an SOE environment, some of the headaches for enterprise users have been the need to install service packs and upgrades, and, you know, don't shut down your machine, upgrades installing, blah, blah, blah. So all that stuff would feasibly be the upside benefit in terms of time, cost and people management on the enterprise side in moving to a cloud model. So not only is the product actually reduced in price, but the actual management ecosystem around that is a reduction on top. So the ROI could be quite significant.
Absolutely. And I think too that now that the hype around cloud has settled, now that we've kind of gone away from people are going to move and completely transform and just go from here to there, we're seeing that actually the words around cloud are coexistence and osmosis. In other words, cloud, the cloud licensing model, the cloud technology has to learn to coexist with on-premise IT, and some people call that hybrid. I'd call it a headache in some respects, because how do you make that work? And
feasibly, would you have the same people inside your IT organisation managing both parts, or would you have separate people? And then that kind of raises questions about, well, do the cool kids get to play with cloud, and our old DBAs who we've had around for 20 years, do we let them stick at the enterprise stuff?
And I think a lot of the on-premise IT has been, we're doing cloud, but really it's effectively, it's the same. It's hosting, it's their own sort of private cloud. But there's now, with the benefits of moving to Azure, for instance, that we are actually seeing that they are picking up sort of components of their on-premise and putting it into this cloud environment. But they still have all their other legacy applications that they have to deal with.
Okay, so let's, having spoken about some of those drivers and challenges, how do they then apply specifically to some of the products that Microsoft might be launching?
I think the Azure, there's a number of products, but I think just on the actual Azure, more on the infrastructure side, that they have this appliance, which is, if you can think of hundreds of servers that are basically packaged, that have Windows Azure, SQL Azure, and all the network and the automation components that go with it. So it's a kind of a really cool way for a partner to be able to plonk a cloud sort of environment, for that customer, either on their premise or wherever it is.
So effectively, cloud management or the API functions in a box connecting to an outside, highly scalable, elastic cloud.
Yeah, hundreds of servers, so you have the full scalability and elasticity. So I thought that was interesting, that kind of appliance thinking, cloud in a box, so to speak. That was cool. Obviously, dynamic CRM was a feature, and that's now multi-tenanted, subscription-based service. And they have 1.7 million users, and I think 27,000 organisations on the Dynamics CRM platform.
I think they're actually moving to Dynamics themselves. I mean, ironically, Microsoft haven't been a massive user of their own CRM or ERP platforms for the majority of their existence. So they're moving, and I guess with Dynamics, some of the enterprise criticism has been the level of customisation required to use it. So similar arguments and drawbacks to the SAP model. So I guess if you're looking at Dynamics now, what are those changes? Obviously, some great strengths in terms of, we would definitely place Microsoft as a cloud platform provider well above SAP with Eclipse, and the work they need to do on that. But what are some of the benefits that they highlighted in terms of why you might choose a dynamic CRM over some of the other stronger players, like a Salesforce, like a Google?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? I think that one of the key things is this developer symmetry. So in other words, whilst Azure and Dynamics are still separate, they've worked hard on this developer symmetry. So it's basically your code in the cloud, and being able to effectively do your own customization, but still be able to do it in a cloud environment.
And that's a really big step for Microsoft, which the campus at Redmond has always operated on a product or business basis. So very much like a university campus, you might have the medical faculty over here and the legal faculty over there and all the art students over there. And so they would literally have their own development hubs. So the ability to bring some of these faculties together, if you like, was really a critical part of the cloud delivery story.
I think also the pricing is interesting. I think anyone who's been down that path of installing Microsoft Dynamics on-premise and knowing that the heavy overhead with its integration with Outlook and the servers and all the infrastructure that was needed, I think it's a positive step that they've driven the pricing down to this sort of hosted, multi-tenanted option. So I think that'll give their partners, their channel partners, basically a real sort of Salesforce alternative.
So what about let's bottom line it on the old favourite, Office? Any Any advances in the Office suite?
Absolutely. Office 365, I mean, you know, basically that fundamentally, you know, you think about Office, it's 25 years in development, you know, it's the market leader, you know, it's obviously...
It's not going anywhere.
It's not going to go anywhere. And, you know, a lot of the research out there sort of seems to indicate that even companies who are implementing Google Docs, for instance, are finding that the Google Docs is not really enterprise ready. There's still a lot of add-ins that they have to basically bolt on, and that can be expensive.
Especially moving beyond those collaborative functions.
Yeah.
I mean, Google Docs, that was the interesting thing for a lot of people, right? The ability to simultaneously multi-author documents.
That's right.
The reality is, how often do we do that inside organisations? You know, it's really, it's great to collaborate, but that kind of technology has actually existed for a long time in the Lotus Symphony products. Even the Lotus Notes products. Now, you know, Microsoft, very strong in that space. As you say, you know, we can't really see Office being dominated by Google, you know, any of the other you know, productivity tools that are coming.
That's right. And I think people thought, you know, okay, we're going to the cloud, so that's Google Docs. But now, you know, here's Office 365, which again is a cloud-based model. So, and the interesting thing about there, it's a quite an amazing transformation in the licensing model. So no longer is it licensed by device. You know, and that was the big selling point with Google Docs, right? Was that, you know, it's per user per month and, you know, per usage. So Office 365 is now down that path. So now it's licensing per user. So it's going to have a lot of play, I think, in a lot of places.
You know, it's interesting. I remember, you know, going back to the late 80s and 90s when the enterprises would quite often get the Microsoft Excel trainers, you know, to come in, or the Word trainers to kind of help us get our heads around these productivity tools when they first came out. That probably hasn't really been necessary for the last, you know, 10 years, 15 years. You know, a lot of people, those that chose to go the macro route within Excel, you know, tended to live inside the finance departments, and they've continued to do that. But the Access databases took over from that, and now we're seeing the next evolution of those sorts of things. But I think it's interesting because there's a lot of very, very cool tools emerging into traditional office productivity suites. And so, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see a bit of an uptick in organisations, you know, looking to better leverage their investments in these things by getting some trainers in to come and step through some of the functionality, because there is some very cool functionality, especially in 365.
Oh, absolutely, and they're bringing in now the desktop conferencing and the video conferencing and the presence. So, you know, that mixed with the VoIP and all those kind of developments that are happening in the enterprise, I think it's just going to make the spectrum of Office, you know, just so much broader. Then lay it on top of, you know, Dynamics, SharePoint, you know, Azure, all those kind of things. It sort of becomes just a platform solution. And companies might have Google Docs in their organisation, but they'll probably still have Office as well.
For sure. Look, I think it's a great story. And the other big picture thing we need to remember and remind ourselves is, a couple of years ago, you know, you couldn't have an analyst conversation about Microsoft without talking about the operating system.
That's right.
You know, it was going to be, Microsoft's they're going to die because they're going to have their operating system revenues cannibalised. Well, the fact is, Azure is going to, you know, make those operating system revenues look infinitesimal, like really, really small. And I think now the whole operating system argument just doesn't come into it. And I think that's a real testament to how far cloud-based models and Microsoft as an organisation has moved. So, you know, thumbs up to Microsoft. They're doing a great job in this space.
And I think a key thing that really indicates that change is you look at Azure, right? Every 60 to 90 days, there's a change, there's an enhancement being added to it online because it's a cloud model, versus the you know, the big release of Windows and the patches and all that kind of thing that followed. So that's a transformational change.
Yeah, it's freeing up space in enterprise portfolio management offices. Right. It's really fantastic. Okay, great brief, thanks.
No worries.
Through, you know, their cloud business productivity solutions, whether or not you're developing business process on an Azure platform capability, or whether or not, as you say, you're buying traditional Microsoft products via cloud-based delivery channels. So, you know, let's start with what was the structure of that first day?
Well, they made sure that whilst there was a lot of product, you know, we see the ad go to the cloud, and, you know, is cloud about family photos? You know, or what is Microsoft's view on it? And it was really an unanswered question. And a lot of the analysts were a little bit uncomfortable about that because Microsoft, I think their view is that they're seeing an increase in virtualization, they're seeing an increase in data centers being built, they're selling a lot more licenses, there's a lot more activity, and I think they're seeing it that this is a traditional way of doing things under a new name.
So as really the question was, what does cloud mean for Microsoft? Scott, you recently flew down to Sydney for a couple of days. Microsoft had its Analyst Cloud Summit. So tell us the highlights.
Yeah, so it was a great event. It was cloud, 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 and there's lots of cloud discussion and Microsoft's viewpoint. Interesting thing that that came out of it, you know, someone asked, well, what's Microsoft's definition of cloud? You know, what is their position on it? And
they're certainly doing enough advertising, you know, consumer-focused advertising for cloud. So this will be interesting. What was their definition?
Yeah, and I think that was the main reason for the question.
And you know, no doubt there was probably a heavy product-flavoured response in their answers. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on from the fact that cloud is an amorphous topic, and certainly if you're dealing with an organisation like Microsoft, there are a number of jump-in points for the cloud discussion, whether or not you're talking about as a service offering through a third party or a channel partner like a Telstra or a Data3 or someone else, or whether you're going direct. Hi, you're with Peter Carr and Scott Stewart on LTV's The Research Channel. Regular briefings we attend for all the big vendors often occur in Sydney, Melbourne, overseas.